Have you ever wondered why a woman's silence cuts deeper than her affection ever could soothe? Why the quiet withdrawal of her energy haunts a man more than the 1,000 tender ways she once tried to hold him together? It's not the absence of words that undoes him. It's the absence of reflection. The mirror he once found in her gaze, the sanctuary of understanding he took for granted, gone without announcement, without permission. Just the vast echo of his own unfinished becoming. Because in truth, it is not her love that dismantles him. It is her disappearance. A woman's silence, when it is born not from submission but from awakening, is not passive. It is the loudest indictment of all. She becomes the absence that reveals the depth of his avoidance, the void that exposes how much of his identity was built upon being seen, being forgiven, being tolerated. When she withdraws, she doesn't just take her affection, she takes the role he unconsciously cast her into, the healer of his wounds, the absorber of his chaos, the caretaker of his unintegrated shadow. Men who have not met their own depths rely on a woman to carry the weight of their unexamined lives. They mistake her empathy for obligation, her forgiveness for permission. And when she finally says nothing, when she no longer explains, no longer defends, no longer tries to reach him through the fog of his pride, it is not indifference, it is transcendence. Her silence is not quiet. It is the scream of boundaries finally found. In that space, something begins to crack, not in her, but in him. He is left with the echoes of every word she once said that he ignored, every intuitive plea she voiced that he dismissed as emotional, every warning she whispered when she still cared enough to fight. And now, there is nothing. No text, no call, no attempt to make him understand what she once burned with the desire to explain. He has become a man without a mirror. You see, most men do not confront their emptiness until they lose the woman who reflected it. And when that reflection disappears, they are faced not with her silence, but with their own. The silence inside of them that her presence once distracted them from. It is in this rupture that their shadow awakens, the dark, disowned self that was never integrated, only projected. The masculine ego is built to conquer, to assert, to define. But what does it do when there is nothing to conquer, no one to argue with, no defense to mount? When she no longer plays the role of the emotional opponent, the spiritual challenger, the wounded muse, he is left alone with the ghost of a woman who once gave him the opportunity to grow and now gives him only the space to reflect, and that is what ruins him. Not because she intended to hurt him, but because she finally stopped helping him hide from himself. In silence, she has stepped out of the archetypal dynamic, no longer the mother, the fixer, the redeemer. She has become something more dangerous, the witness who walks away. And in doing so, she forces him, perhaps for the first time, to face the man he has built on avoidance. The man who confused possession for intimacy, validation for connection, control for safety. You, the woman listening now, you were never meant to stay where your soul was starved. You were not created to beg for coherence, to water dead soil with your tears. You are not difficult for needing depth. You are not dramatic for demanding presence. Your silence is not a weapon. It is a prayer answered. It is the final note in a symphony he refused to hear. When you go quiet, truly quiet, not in bitterness but in clarity, you remove your energy from the role he depended on. And if he is a man of substance, this absence becomes his initiation. But if he is not, it becomes his unraveling. Because without your emotional labor, he must confront the hollowness he masked with your devotion. He may try to provoke you, may send one-word messages, half-hearted apologies, breadcrumb memories designed to pull you back into orbit, not because he misses you, but because he misses who he was when you carried his chaos. He does not want your love, he wants your maintenance. But your silence says that chapter is over. He cannot rage at your silence. He cannot seduce it. He cannot manipulate it. It is not a game. It is the altar of your rebirth. And every time he reaches for you and finds only the echo of his own choices, he meets the consequence not of your cruelty, but of your evolution. You didn't ruin him. You revealed him. A woman's silence, when rooted in self-respect and not resentment, becomes a sacred withdrawal, a reclamation of power once scattered across the battlefield of unreciprocated effort. It is not an act of war, but a return to peace. Not a punishment, but a proclamation. I will no longer abandon myself for the comfort of a man who cannot meet me where I am. And therein lies the ruin. He may not grasp it at first. The absence may seem like a pause, a brief intermission in the drama he believed he still directed. But with time, the quiet deepens. The silence does not crack. She does not return. There is no door left open. The ritual of being pursued, forgiven, re-invited, broken, because now her silence is not waiting. It is moving on. In psychological terms, the anima, Jung's concept of the feminine within the male psyche, has left him. Not just the woman, but the symbolic feminine that once mirrored the depth he could not access alone. She was the invitation into his own unconscious, and he declined it, repeatedly, until it vanished. Her silence becomes the severance of that spiritual umbilical cord, and he, now cut off from her emotional wisdom, is left with the barren landscape of his own denial. No more projection, no more scapegoat, only the confrontation with himself. And this is the deeper tragedy. Not that she stopped loving him, but that she outgrew the role he needed her to play. For the man who refuses to evolve, this silence is unbearable. Not because of her, but because of what her absence reflects. That he was never enough, not to her but to himself. That he relied on her to supply what he would not cultivate within: vulnerability, self-awareness, humility. She held the mirror, but he refused to look. And now, it is gone. You must understand. Men are not ruined by silence in the way a child is ruined by punishment. They are ruined in the way a man is undone by truth. Her silence is not noise withheld. It is a mirror shattered. It is the collapse of an illusion. She no longer explains because she no longer needs him to understand. She is no longer speaking because she has stopped asking to be seen. This is what women discover when they walk away without anger. That stillness is more potent than confrontation. That dignity speaks louder than desperation. That true power is not in what she says, but in what she refuses to repeat. You, the woman who is learning this now, you were never too much. You were simply too whole for a man who loved broken things. You asked for truth in a world built on emotional illusion. You offered depth in a culture obsessed with surface. And when he could not meet you, you stopped begging. You stopped speaking. And in doing so, you forced him into the silence of his own undoing. He may tell others you were cold, detached, emotionally distant. He may say you gave up too soon, that you changed. But what he will never admit, perhaps even to himself, is that your silence was the final gift, the last opportunity to grow, the final doorway into becoming a man instead of merely performing one. But most do not walk through it, because becoming requires descent into the shadow, into the grief of lost comfort, into the truth of one's failures. And it is easier to blame the silence than to face what it reveals. Easier to label her too emotional or too demanding than to admit he never learned how to hold her in her wholeness. Easier to call her absence cruelty than to realize it was mercy she no longer owed. When she no longer corrects his lies, when she stops reacting to his games, when she does not rise to his provocations, it is not because she does not feel. It is because she has finally felt enough. enough to know that staying is self-betrayal, enough to know that love, without growth, becomes a prison, enough to choose herself, not because she hates him, but because she loves herself more than she fears his loss. And this, ultimately, is what ruins the man. Not her silence alone, but the realization that her silence means she will never again be his mirror. The man now lives in the wake of a woman who no longer reflects him, and that absence becomes his reckoning. It arrives not as thunder, but as a long, unrelenting quiet. Days pass, nights stretch wide. The silence does not soothe, it strips him bare. Because in that silence he no longer sees her. He sees himself, the self he avoided, the boy still hiding inside the man's shell, the emptiness he dressed up in bravado, in charm, in conquest. For the first time, he is left without distraction. There is no emotional storm to point to, no crisis to manage, no crazy woman to blame. She took her chaos with her when she left, but it turns out it was never hers to begin with. It was his. Now the room echoes with the weight of what he projected onto her. She was too much? No. He was too little? She was too emotional? No. He was too numb? She asked for too much? No, he offered too little. Her silence is now the soft, eternal no that will haunt him more than her love ever could. Because love is negotiable. It bends. It flexes. It tries. But silence is final. Silence is sacred. It cannot be undone. What he doesn't understand is that when a woman falls silent, she has already cried every tear. She has already rehearsed every plea in her mind, said it in 100 ways before realizing it fell into a void. She begged with her presence. She explained with her patience. She endured in the name of hope. But silence, that is not endurance. That is the end of hope. There is no ritual left, no script. She will not return to the theater of his projections. She no longer exists in his world as an emotional caretaker. She has transcended the need to fix, to soften, to heal what was never hers to carry. Her silence is not cruel. It is clean. It is the exhale after years of holding her breath. You must understand this, woman of fire and softness. Your silence is not empty. It is full of every version of you that tried, every self that bent just slightly, hoping he'd see, every compromise that twisted your spirit a little more until you didn't recognize your own reflection. And when you fell silent, you didn't just stop speaking. You remembered your worth. And in that remembering, he faces the unbearable. Because now he knows you will not come back to prove your love again. You will not reach out to reassure him that he still holds space in your heart. You will not return as the wounded girl hoping he's changed. You will not resurrect the ghost of the woman he knew. Because the woman he knew no longer exists. This is the ruin he cannot repair, not the loss of your affection, but the death of who you were when you still loved him. He cannot resurrect what his apathy helped bury, and that reality, the finality of it, sits in his bones heavier than guilt. He remembers now. He remembers the way you looked at him when you still believed. He remembers your laughter when you were still soft. He remembers the subtle shift when the light in your eyes began to dim, when your voice trembled not with anger, but exhaustion. He remembers the last time you said something important and he didn't really listen. And now, in silence, you've become unforgettable. Because the men who are half asleep are only awakened by loss. Not the loss of a body, but the loss of access. The loss of being central in a heart that once revolved around them. And now, they watch from a distance, somewhere beyond your voice, outside your world, where their name no longer has power. It is there, in the aftermath, that the soul begins to ache. Not just for you, but for who he might have been if he had chosen to rise. And you, woman of silence, do not need him to see this. You do not need him to apologize. You do not need him to change. Your silence is not a test. It is not a challenge. It is not a tactic. It is simply a new way of being, unchained. And that, more than any argument, ruins him. Because he knows now he can never again reach you in the way he once could. You no longer need to be understood. You no longer need to be believed. You no longer seek closure from a man who couldn't hold your truth the first time you spoke it. He is not ruined because you left. He is ruined because you did not look back. There is a peculiar kind of silence that lives in the aftermath of a woman's detachment, a silence that does not beg to be heard, but insists on being felt. It lingers like smoke after a sacred fire has burned everything false to ash. It seeps into a man's consciousness, not with rage, but with revelation. Not with punishment, but with prophecy. You had her, and you lost her, not to another man, but to the woman she became in your absence. For the woman who goes silent has not disappeared. She has returned to herself. He does not realize at first that she is not simply not speaking. She is building, restoring. She is becoming more herself with every moment that her energy is no longer siphoned into his chaos. She is not waiting for a call, not hoping for a change. She is walking deeper into her own life, her own voice, her own knowing. And the further she walks, the smaller he becomes, not in pettiness, but in clarity. Because clarity strips away the illusions we once mistook for love. She now sees how much of her energy was spent nurturing the boy in him who refused to grow. She sees how often she was cast as the villain for merely expressing her needs. She sees how her compassion was weaponized against her, how her nurturing nature was used as a shield to protect him from responsibility. And now, without explanation, she is gone still. This stillness terrifies him more than any shouting ever did, because a man can tune out noise, he can rationalize tears, he can argue with anger, but he cannot argue with absence, he cannot debate a void, he cannot win a power struggle with someone who no longer plays the game. He may try to provoke a reaction, he may act indifferent, he may even try to replace her quickly, thinking another woman will fill the gap, but nothing fills the space of a woman who once held the depth of your becoming and then chose to put that energy back into herself. Because it was never about any woman. It was about the archetype he lost, the inner feminine he refused to meet within himself, now mirrored in the one who left. In Jungian terms, she has withdrawn the anima from the projection, and now he is left with a fragmented psyche. A masculine shell with no tether to depth, no bridge to the inner world. She once held that bridge, not because she had to, but because she loved him. And he mistook that love as infinite. But love, real love, must flow in both directions. And when it does not, it calcifies, it hardens, it breaks. The tragedy is not just that he lost her. It's that he never truly saw her while he had the chance. He saw his needs, his desires, his fears reflected in her, and mistook that reflection for intimacy. He thought he was loving her, but he was only using her light to fill his darkness. And when she stopped shining it on him, he was left in the cold of his own unlit soul. But you, woman of silence, no longer carry that burden. You have relinquished the role of mirror. You have stepped off the stage of his projections. You no longer exist in relation to his becoming. You have remembered your own. You now speak in the language of self-worth. You wear peace like a crown. You move not with vengeance, but with sovereignty. And though he may still whisper your name in the late hours, may still scroll through your memories, may still wait for a message that will never come, he does so not because you were cruel, but because you were the lesson he refused to learn. And now you are the memory he cannot rewrite. This is what ruins a man. Not the drama, not the heartbreak, but the silent realization that she will never again offer him her softness without substance. that she has replaced effort with ease, pleasing with purpose, attachment with awareness, and that in her silence, she became everything he once feared, unavailable to his ego, unchained from his need, and untouchable by his regret. You are not the silence. You are the storm that passed, the calm that followed, and the sunlight that never begged to be noticed again. And him? He will remember, not just the way you laughed or touched or cried. He will remember the silence that followed, the silence that stripped him of illusion, the silence that said without ever speaking, "This is who I am without you, and I am more." There comes a moment, often too late, when a man sits alone in the life he built without her and realizes he mistook her presence for permanence. He believed she would always stay, always explain, always soften, always return. He didn't know that silence is a woman's last language, that when she falls quiet, she is not suppressing, she is finished. The silence is not a space waiting to be filled. It is the final sentence in a story she no longer wants to write. He begins to remember now, not just the things she said, but the way she said them, the tone that carried her truth, the eyes that once begged him to meet her in depth. He replays scenes where he thought he won the argument, where his detachment gave him control, and now he sees. Every time she went quiet after a fight, it wasn't because he was right. It was because something inside her was beginning to break. And when that break turned into stillness, he mistook it for peace. But it was the death of her desire to be understood. Her love was not weak, it was fierce. It carried him through his own storms. It stood by him when he could barely stand for himself. It forgave things that should have been unforgivable. It held space that he thought would always be available, until the cost became too great, until she realized that love without reciprocity is self-erasure. And so she chose rebirth over ruin. He cannot comprehend this at first, because for so long she made room for his emotional immaturity. She translated his moods. She navigated his silence like a maze, thinking if she just loved him better, he'd meet her halfway. But now she knows. Love does not heal what someone refuses to confront. And a man who hides from himself will always run from the woman who sees him. So now, as her silence deepens, he finds himself haunted not by her voice, but by the void she left behind. Every space where her energy once flowed, now still. Every gesture she made out of love, now gone. Every future she imagined with him collapsed into dust, and the ruin is not in her departure, it's in what her departure reflects, his refusal to evolve, because no matter how many women come after her, none will be her. He can replace her body. He cannot replace her presence. Because her presence was sacred. It was medicine. It was truth delivered with trembling hands. And now that it's gone, he realizes he was never entitled to it. He realizes that love is not something we keep. It is something we earn through effort, awareness, and reciprocity. And you, the woman listening now, know this. Your silence is not the absence of love. It is the presence of boundaries. It is the sanctuary you built for yourself after war. It is the reclamation of every part of you that was exhausted trying to be enough for someone who wouldn't meet you. You are not heartless. You are healed. You are not distant. You are discerning. You are not punishing him. You are preserving yourself. Because the moment you fell silent was not the moment you stopped caring. It was the moment you stopped sacrificing yourself in the name of care. It was the moment you saw your reflection again and decided, she matters more than his potential. And now, he will remember you not as the girl who waited, not as the woman who begged, but as the force who walked away when her spirit said, no more. He will tell himself stories to soften the truth. He will say you gave up, that you were too intense, too sensitive, too complicated. But deep down, he knows. He knows you stayed longer than you should have, loved harder than you had to, gave more than you ever received. And in the end, you did what he never expected. You left without needing to be asked again. And now, your silence stretches across his memory like a sacred echo, a reminder of the depth he touched but could not hold. A woman he had the chance to meet at the soul and instead tried to mold to his convenience. But you are not made for convenience. You are made of storm and starlight, of stillness and power. And when you fell silent, you became untouchable, not because you hardened, but because you remembered who you were before he forgot. And now he must live with the most haunting silence of all, the kind that carries no anger, no plea, no pain, only freedom. There is no sound more final than the silence of a woman who has risen. Not silence born of fear or confusion, but of clarity. The kind of clarity that comes only after the storm, after the crying behind closed doors, after the inner war between loyalty and self-love has finally ended. Her silence now is not fragile. It is forged. It does not tremble. It stands. It does not ask. It declares. And he will feel it, not just in the emptiness where she once stood, but in the growing dissonance within himself. Because her silence did not leave a void, it left a mirror that now shows him what he could not or would not see before. That she was the portal to his awakening, and now that portal is closed. This is the moment when some men begin the long descent into the shadow. Because when the anima, the feminine guide within his psyche, has been severed from its outer projection, he is left no choice but to look inward. If he is courageous, he will begin the inner journey she once invited him into. The path of individuation, of reckoning with the false self he wore like armor, of meeting the boy within who never learned how to feel without fear, how to speak without control, how to love without possession. But most will not choose this path, not immediately, because it demands death before rebirth, and death terrifies the ego more than anything. So he will linger in the echo of her, try to recreate her in others, try to provoke her back with breadcrumbs of remorse. But the woman he once knew is gone, not because she vanished, but because she evolved. And what ruins him is knowing that she will never again shrink to fit his smallness. You see, when a woman does her inner work, when she integrates her own shadow, stops chasing love in wounded places, and chooses self-reverence over external validation, she becomes untouchable to the man who refuses to meet himself. She no longer needs closure from him because she gave it to herself. She no longer waits for him to grow because she grew past him. She no longer dreams of him returning because she has returned to herself. And now her silence is a garden, not a grave, a sanctuary, not a punishment, a signal to the world and to herself that her energy is no longer available for erosion. And what man, once adored like a king, could bear the fall from her favor without unraveling? Because while love builds, silence reveals, and the woman who once saw the soul inside him and held it with tenderness has now become the woman who holds herself, not from pride, but from wisdom, not from bitterness, but from rebirth. She is no longer the woman who gave until it hurt. She is the woman who knows that her value is not measured by how much pain she can endure in the name of loyalty. She is the woman who speaks not in apologies, but in presence, who walks away not to punish, but to protect, who chooses silence not as retreat, but as resurrection. And to the man who once thought she'd never leave, who thought her love would survive his indifference, his dismissals, his emotional neglect, there is no deeper devastation than realizing that he was wrong. She did leave, not loudly, not cruelly, but completely. And there is no door she forgot to close. So let him sit with that silence. Let him learn from it. Let it ruin the parts of him that could not hold her, so something truer can rise from the wreckage. And let you rise too. Rise into your womanhood with sacred sovereignty. With a heart that beats not for someone else's acceptance, but for your own liberation. Speak when you want to. Be still when you must. Choose the peace that never asks you to bleed for it. Because the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase. She chooses.